that stuff. I'm kind of one of those JA generalists. So, I was a little surprised to get the call, but really pleased and have learned an incredible amount this year. So, those were our goals. Marty's pretty much alluded to that. You do not have copies of the slides because I know how we all are. But you already have 98% of the information that's on the slides in what you got in the mail in advance and then what was in our packets today. So Marty's really talked about why a brand committee in some ways. I went another step. Phil Romano, who was Romano's Macaroni Grill, Fuddruckers, phenomenal marketer, phenomenal brand guy, actually was one of our laureates in Louisville, and then came and did a brand presentation to our board. He's amazing and fascinating. And Phil's definition of brand is you see a sign, and it's the gut reaction that that sign evokes. And what you want that gut reaction to be is your brand. It's not your logo, it's not the advertisement, it's not the font, it's what is that emotional connection to the sign. So that's what I went back to Frank and Marty and said, okay, this is how I want to approach that. Because if we're just talking about logo kind of stuff, that is nowhere near anywhere in my wheelhouse. So we had two outcomes. What's the desired future essence of the pioneer? So what is that gut reaction? And then making sure, we've talked a lot about it this afternoon, how do we get the Megans of the world to want to be pioneers when they're done with JA, at whatever point that is? Who do we want to be, and what activities are going to support that? So here's who played. A lot of these names you're not going to recognize. Maria Baumgartner happened to work for me in Louisville. She was a program manager who grew up in Toledo. Jack Kozakowski was her center manager. It's a very small world. She got the scholarship that changed her life. And then she ultimately came to work for JA. She left about 8 or 9 years ago. Beth Bush, many of you may have known her husband Gary. Beth was also in JA, worked for Gerald Scott in Atlanta. Lori Onstadt spent part of her career at headquarters. Lori Stern was a student in JA, and I forget where, but for some reason I think it was in Toledo. Worked for JA for a short period of time after college in the San Jose office. This group better represents our new membership criteria. 5 years experience in JA and over the age of 40. And that's it. So we felt it was really important to diversify that group. So I want to thank Robin. We have people, let's see, Kathy was a president, Marty was a president, and I was a president. So most of the, so half the group was in secondary positions. Again, better representing the pioneers' future demographics. So there was some thought process besides the fact I knew most of these people and liked them. So we started with this meeting last year, and Don facilitated a discussion because I wasn't able to be at the meeting because I took my mother to Alaska. And what was the perception of the pioneers, just within the group that was there? And I didn't see any surprises in this list. Do you see any surprises in this list?
Well, old folks.
When you take a look at perception by those who still work for JA, we just didn't really see a whole lot of surprises there. So we also ask these questions. New member criteria. So we got to look at a whole different way. Again, we've been talking about that a lot this afternoon. What do we need to consider? What do we need to change? And what we figured out is we really needed to look at why people left JA, what else is going on in their lives, and what their current affinity is for JA. I mean, do they even care? Because if they don't, what difference does it make? Beth Bush is a marketing person by skill set. She's done some amazing marketing plans for lots of organizations and done brand research. Most recently, she did some brand research for the Licensed Practicing Nurse Association. Talk about people who get treated like not very nicely by their bosses. And so she put together the document that looks a little bit differently in your packet, but it is the research purpose, the hypotheses we worked with, and looking at the underlying issues, and where we started. And originally we talked about, oh, let's do a survey, let's make it broad-based. And Beth really got us thinking very differently. If you use focus group practices, you're going to get deeper insight and find out from fewer people what a general thought process might be. And so we had lots of questions and lots of head scratching on how that might work. And then we thought, okay, what have we got to lose? We can always go back and do a big survey if we didn't feel we got good quality information. So this is more qualitative than quantitative. Target audience initially qualified to be a JA pioneer, was not a pioneer yet, and finished their career in the field. We felt, because I had served at National, I personally felt that if National had been my last stop, I would have had a very different perception of the organization than my last stop being the field. And since most people leave the organization from the field, that seemed to be a criteria that made sense to us. We started looking at 2007, looking at the last 10 years. And then as we looked at people we could find, because rightly so, JA USA would not release any contact information for privacy purposes, we decided to shorten that to since January of 2012. Part of that was based on how long it had been since most of us on the committee had left JA, and who we knew in our personal networks. Plan was research focused. We had a goal of 12, and again, that was based on Beth's experiences in doing this over a career, that was a good number to work with. 45 minutes with an interviewer and a scribe. The hypotheses we were testing, we narrowed it down, because there's only so much you can do in 45 minutes. Perception of current membership and perception of the organization. We spent lots of time discussing what we thought we would get. And then we would start with the criteria I showed you on the prior slides. This was the 45-minute interview. And the way the process worked is we were able to get, Ken Wasova, as membership chair, had a fairly complete list of names, including their exit date from junior achievement. So we sorted, and we ultimately came up with a list of eligible people. Sent that list out to the committee, who knew whom, that they could ask. Again, you ask somebody you know, you're more likely to get a yes. Part of our design was that if Ron was going to be interviewed, and I know Ron, I would call and ask Ron to be part of the process, but I would not interview Ron. The goal being keep as much baggage, good, bad, or ugly, out of the process as we possibly could. Each person who agreed to be interviewed then received an email from me introducing their interviewer and their scribe. And those three people together then worked on dates. Because the more people you have in the mix of figuring out dates, the crazier it gets. Some of those dates changed, but we were able to get all of the interviews done in the month of January, which was really our plan. We were stunned that we were able to get it done, but we did. For each call, some we recorded, and then we decided to stop recording because it made just for a better environment. And I've deleted all those recordings anyway. Robin scribed on a number, Marty did some interviews, I scribed and interviewed. We did the introduction, reminded the person what we were doing and why we were doing it. Introduced this journey map, which really asked people to take 4 or 5 minutes if they had not done it in advance to take a look at their JA journey, whether it started when they were an achiever, a volunteer, or a staff person, and just jot some notes about it. What were the highlights of their career, what, their experiences, what were the lowlights. We then asked them if they were retired versus having quit. Asked them to do the same thing on a retirement map. As we talked about, and I'll get to the data and the conclusions in a couple minutes, as we talked about the J journey, that's where we got most of our insight and most of our valuable, actionable, if you will, information. Perception of the J pioneers kind of went right back to what we heard a year ago. Not a lot of surprises there. Perception of the J pioneer mission, huge insights. And then J pioneer meetings, Marty had asked us to add that to the list, and there were some changes made to this meeting based on feedback. Very clearly came from people on our dozen calls that unless there was some impact on JA that came out of a meeting, out of a JA Pioneer gathering, they had no interest in coming. Had to be an impact on the organization. I mean, that was huge. We started our work in September. So the data, who played? There were 2 retirees. Time with J, as you can see, spanned significantly. 10 women, 2 men. To be candid, when we finished our first round of interviews, because while we wanted 12, our minimum requirement was 10. We didn't have any boys. So we went back hunting for boys. Then we went back and looked at the data. Our initial population was 254 eligible people. 225 women, 29 men. So what does that tell you about how J has changed since some of us started with the organization? So we met the data criteria because we had 17% of our population who participated were men. So at least we did that. And then you can see the mix of where people had served in their career. No, it does not add up to 12 because people are in different places. They may be in senior management as an education person, senior management as an operations specialist, but we just wanted to understand and document the diversity of experiences, and that better reflects the population that will be eligible to join the pioneers in the future.
Then a quick question.
Yeah.
So only 2 of the 12 actually retired from JA,
Correct.
and the other 10
Left one way or another.
Okay.
Okay. Questions to this point? Okay. So here's the piece we're going to ask you to start thinking about, and Todd's going to facilitate this tomorrow, really so I can do a better job of listening. You can't facilitate and listen at the same time. At least I can't do that well. And not to be able to take actionable thoughts out of our discussion tomorrow morning into the September meeting and back to my task force. And we also have been reporting back to the 12 people who participated in the focus group interviews. Okay, so here are the key things we learned. And now I have to get my glasses out. Highlights were, for us, everything we expected. Mission-driven. People, whether it was their colleagues in the office, whether it was their colleagues across the country, board members, volunteers, teachers. That's what makes JA so special, are the relationships that we've all garnered. I mean, Julie, I met you once, way in the early days of my career. Would have no expectation of you remembering who I was, but the fact that you chose to come back after so many years says something about the relationships we've all gathered through this organization. John was among the first professional staff people I knew. He was in Cedar Rapids at the time. Tells you how long ago that was.
Long time ago.
A really long time ago. And then people talked about, regardless of the environment, they learned and grew. I mean, I was 23 when I took over my first operation. Who gets to be a CEO at 23? I mean, we got amazing opportunities in this organization. People recognize that, regardless of their role in their local office or how they left. Lowlights, gee, money, politics, lack of knowledge of what's going on, and then no promotion opportunities. And that hasn't changed. Even though our organizations are bigger and there are more jobs, if you're not willing to move, it's harder to move up. And JA is no different than anyone else in that arena. And people start to realize that. Continued involvement with the local office really depended on the time, and really important was in the manner how they left JA. And then, of course, back to the old fundraising, Henry Hefner. If you don't ask, you don't get. Interesting in this, in the manner in which they left JA, of the dozen people we talked to, one was made to believe when she left that she was never allowed to talk to anybody within the organization again. One was, and that was by, these were by their local presidents. One just thought that the local president just did a horrendous job of doing some things and just left really bitter feelings about the organization. And the one who was made to feel that she had no recourse and couldn't talk to anybody within JA again, had relationships across the country, not just in her local market. So we found that pretty consistent. Now, she was at the way far end of it, but we heard that across all 12 interviews. If there was a negative reason for leaving JA, and if you think about it logically, it makes sense. You know, if you leave anywhere with a bad taste in your mouth, it's not something you really want to pursue, unless somebody asks you for the right reason or it's the right relationship. Most have maintained relationships with JA, not necessarily locally. You know, the engagement with the local office also depended, a couple of the presidents, all the presidents we talked to very clearly said, I stepped aside, not my party to run anymore, and didn't want anybody to think that I wanted to. You know, new person comes in, let it be their party. So that's very different than some of the secondary staff who had left. There we go. Perceptions are reality. Mission things that we heard. It's great that it's concise, but there's no ask. There's no actionable target other than to support JAUSA, the mission of JAUSA. But what does that really mean? People didn't know and couldn't tell from the mission statement what we were looking for. And then, of course, we made some of the mistakes that we've all made, is somebody would join and 5 seconds later they would get the fundraising letter. That didn't really help. And that just was sheer happenstance. You know, if they joined and it was scheduled to go out, they were on the database. And so we continue to learn. Struggle, call to action. For those of you who know Kenny Wasaba, he's nothing if not determined. Okay? He was the first guy who offered me a job at JA. Somehow I turned him down. But Kenny took every name, and then we were also very lucky. Kathy Arns, who is the former JA president in Baton Rouge. Kathy served on both committees. And so Kathy was able to take